because war is always coming. Always down the line is a war. So we need to make sure we're self-sufficient in many things, and food production is one of them.
British farmers
Mm.
are getting a very raw deal, have been for a long time. At the moment, there's a new proposal that they will pay inheritance tax in farms over a certain value. That's causing a lot of unhappiness. Talk about betrayal that's ultimately culminating in a protest in London today. What are your thoughts on Reeves's amendment of inheritance tax laws with regards to British farmers in the last budget?
First of all, I hope that the weather today doesn't affect the turnout with the farmers, because if it's a low turnout due to the weather, the government will claim a victory there, going, look, the farmers aren't that really bothered about it, are they? Only 10 turned up, so I hope the weather doesn't stop them. The farmer thing is a little bit more complicated than we think. So, first of all, we need to remember this is an island. We don't produce all our own food. Every decade, we produce less and less and less. Hitler nearly starved us to death and starved us out of the Second World War because we didn't produce enough of our food. That has to be in our memory, because war is always coming. Always down the line is a war. So, we need to make sure we're self sufficient in many things, and food production is one of them. Farmers themselves have got so much red tape and bureaucracy on their shoulders due to governments over the last 70 years. And then we wonder why we've got to give them subsidies to keep the farms going. We wonder why we import fruit and veg from Spain and meat from over the world because it's cheaper. Well, why is it cheaper? It's because it's not fair on UK farmers, because they've got to live up to a much higher standards to produce food here, so we buy it cheaper elsewhere. And then with the inheritance tax, this is the final nail in the coffin for many family-owned farms. Some farms don't make it and go in bankrupt anyway. The farms who are just about making it work really hard, but then when they want to pass that farm on to their son or their daughter, what Labour's proposing is now you're going to pay inheritance tax. So you're going to have to inherit the lands, go to the bank, get a loan if you can, because you might not be able to get a loan because the bank will go, you're not making any money on this farm. But let's say you can get a loan, you've got to pay that loan back. That'll be enough to push so many farmers into bankruptcy if they can get the loan in the first place. And then what will happen on those farmlands? Big businesses will come along and buy up and all bank the land or turn it into wind farms or solar panels or housing estates, and we'll lose more and more land, and our countryside will end up changing the way it looks at the moment. And I don't see how farmers can allow this to begin with, and how as a country we should allow this, because farmland is really, really important to us. And the best thing about the farmers is they've got the public on their side. I'm against the Free Palestine marches. I'm against the Just Stop Oil marches for causing inconvenience. I'll put up with some inconvenience if it's for the farmers.
You mentioned as well there about farming is traditionally a family and intergenerational business. You know, most farmers inherited from their parents who inherited
Mm.
from theirs, and on it goes. And you also mentioned that, okay, saying there is an inheritance tax liability, you go to the bank possibly and take out a loan that you could pay back, but they won't lend you it because you can't show that you have any income. In the past, for inheritance tax planning, usually if people were hit with a big inheritance tax bill, which in the past had to be paid before the estate was released, many banks would give bridging loans. So if you had a house or a property that you had as capital, the bank would say, okay, you sell that, you pay back the bridging loan, and then you keep the balance. The
Mm.
problem with farmers, and people have put that, well, just sell some of the farm or just sell a part of the farm. Can't normally do that because maybe nobody wants a quarter of a farm, or which quarter do you sell, or do you get a better or a worse price depending on whether or not you would sell the whole thing as a package. So they're kind of over a barrel. A lot of people are saying, well, what's the problem? You know, you've got a £4 million farm. You want us to feel sorry for you because you're going to have to pay a certain percentage of that tax. You keep the difference. It's putting you out of a family business, number one.
Mm.
Maybe these people don't know what to do when they come out of that business. And number three, you know, it's this these are our food producers. These are the
Mm.
people that are putting food on our tables, and they may be asset rich, which most farmers are, but they very often are cash poor, or they're just about scrimping through after busting their asses week in, week out. So I don't think people really understand the mechanics of farming or what's actually involved in wrapping a farm up if they do get out of the business.
To me, this is one of Labour's policies of envy. They look at the farmers and they go, "You're just like a 19th century land gentry, and you own all this. You didn't earn and get this. You were given this, and they probably stole it off someone else, and that's how you got this land. You're like the bourgeoisie. We're the proletariat. We've got to punish you for stealing that land in the first place. This is just a Labour policy of envy, just like the VAT on schools."
Mhm. One other thing, actually, just you mentioned that about acquisition of farmland. There's a high profile farmer who's in London today, I believe, in the shape and form of Jeremy Clarkson.
Mm,
And one of the things Rachel Reeves said she wanted to do was close the loophole where people were coming in and buying farms as investments. And then whenever they died, an inheritance tax move to avoid inheritance tax or paying inheritance tax. Which again, if that's a loophole, then that's a loophole. Maybe it should
mm,
only apply to new investors in farmland, but it should not apply to intergenerational farmers. Or the farm has been shown to be in the business or in the family for a very, very long time. With this protest that's going on in London as we speak, I believe. It's not the only one that's happening. Irish farmers are up in arms at the
mm.
moment. French farmers, I believe, were protesting yesterday as well. We had the massive Dutch farming protest that happened last year because it was effectively they attempted a land grab on them. Also, it seems to be it's not isolated to just one part of Britain or one part of Europe. This seems to be a blanket thing that's going on, literally, to get their hands on priceless farmland.
Yeah, do you remember what happened 18 months ago in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, the government was overthrown in Sri
Yeah.
Lanka, and look at the state that that place has been in ever since.
Yeah, all because the government was pushing net zero, started banning farmers from using fertilizers because of how much chemicals are in it, whatever. They couldn't produce enough food. The people got hungry and they tore the government down. This is what can happen if you keep pushing the people and pushing the people. I don't think for one moment we're anywhere near that in this country,
Mhm.
but that's where it can lead to.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the key. These things have to start somewhere, and
Mm,
it's a little bit like when you talked about Britain's being murdered at the moment. That it's a strangulation or a suffocation. It doesn't happen immediately. It
mm,
literally drains the life from you step by step. I think this is the beginning of what could be a very slippery slope that we're heading down because when you interfere with food supply
mm,
and the government starts to try and key in some control over the nation's food supply, well, that's the most important lever that they could have when it comes to people doing what they're told. If you don't do what you're told, maybe you don't get to eat further down the line if this reaches
yeah.
its final destination. So I think that's why there's such a pushback against this, not just from the farmers who may stand to lose their land and their livelihood, but people are. I don't know anyone that's against this in terms
Mm,
of public support. I think them farmers are unreasonable. No, they're the ones that put food on our tables, and if we didn't have that, and as the farmers have pointed out, they can escalate this. They could escalate this to withholding food and
mm,
the supermarket shelves go empty. You saw what it was like in 2020, people
yeah.
scrambling to buy toilet rolls and paracetamols. Could you imagine what it'll be like if people are queuing around the block to get a loaf of bread or to get some milk or to get
Yeah.
some eggs or whatever it happened, and they're not there? Can you imagine even 3 days what that would do to the nation?
I know exactly what that would be like because I've seen it on TV and it's called Soviet Russia
Hmm.
2, 3, 4 decades ago. And that's exactly where all our socialist governments for the last 70 years, apart from Thatcher, all the rest of them have been socialist governments. Even the Tories have been socialist. That's where they're taking us. They're taking us to their vision of Soviet Russia. And
Hmm.
I don't want to go on that journey.
No, and neither do the farmers, and it
Mm.
would look like they have the support of many of the
Yeah.
public. I'm just looking here at a report. Environment Secretary Steve Reed has commented and said, "We've had to ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay a little bit more." He added, "The vast majority of farmers will pay nothing even after the changes." So he's effectively saying, "Look, we want the richest, biggest farmers. They've got broad shoulders. They will." they will take the brunt of this. But most people won't worry too much about it. Why should they take the brunt of it when money is being taken and squandered on overseas climate packages or funding overseas wars to the tunes of billions for as long as it takes in the eyes of the government? Why should farmers have to take the brunt with broad shoulders when money's obviously not being managed effectively by the current administration?
Exactly. We're not a poor country. We're an extremely rich country. We're not short of money in this country, but we're running out of money because the government keeps spending it incorrectly. They have different priorities to what the public have. We've just promised Africa 12 billion to look at climate change. We're constantly funding Ukraine. Ukraine's complicated. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying we find money for Ukraine.
Yeah.
We've just funded some guy who's not even British, who lives in a European country. We've just funded him £200,000 to research the history of homosexual pornography. We, we keep wasting money across the board, and then we go back to the taxpayer and farmers and we go, you need to pay more. No, the answer is we need to slash the size of the state. The state does too much. It does it all poorly. We're funding things people don't want. There's too many projects that a minister just likes, so we fund it. We need to slash the size of the state. It's too big, and we're turning into Soviet Russia, like I said.
Yeah, step by step. And just to round this off, again, depending who you talk to, they'll say, "Well, it's nothing much to be concerned about." Other people would say it's a massive concern. So the government says it will only affect the wealthiest 500 estates each year. So on one side, you have the government said 500 estates each year. That's not many, really. That they're positioning it that way. But the NFU, the National Farmers Union, and the Country Land and Business Association have estimated up to 70,000 farms could be affected. So on one side, you've got 500, the government saying it's only the top 500 will be affected. On the other side, you have the actual farmers union and the so-called Country and Land and Business Association say, no, you're 500, you're looking at 70,000 here. So those are pretty wide estimates on who might be affected. I know which side I would fall on there, and it definitely wouldn't be on the government's.
Exactly. And let's take the government's stats as fact. 500 a year will be affected. How many farmers die every year? There's not tens and tens of thousands of farmers dying every year, and we're only going to tax the top 500. It's probably, I don't know the figure, but it won't be that many farmers who are dying who are then trying to pass on their farm to their children anyway. So just using the term 500 farms is a smokescreen. They need to tell us, out of all the farmers who die every year, what percentage of them will be taxed. That's the figure I want to know, because it could be 70, 80% of all farmers are taxed.